Well, good evening to the two chairpersons, to the various honorable members that are present, and media and members of the public, and the teams that we have representing SAA, Eskom, and Transnet. Thank you very much for this opportunity to brief you. You're absolutely right, Chair. We are living under exceptional circumstances where this kind of electronic medium is now, or digital medium is available for us to communicate. But it also means that when we reach some kind of new normality, it might be an idea for all portfolio committees to leave officials in Pretoria, and you can have the same kind of interaction in the future as we actually go. But that's for the future. What I want guidance on from you, Chairperson, is can I go through SAA, Eskom, and Transnet presentations, some on my own, some with the assistance of chairs and officials from those respective institutions, and then we come to question time. Is that okay? You are muted, Chair. You are muted.
Yeah, we are still students in this thing. Yeah, I give you, Minister, go ahead, and I hope all members will be prepared to dot whatever question they have. Just go with your presentation right through to all those areas that you have prepared.
All right, so they're going to flight the presentations for you as well from the committee section. So could we look at SAA for a start, followed by Eskom, then followed by Transnet? So I'm waiting for the committee section. But just by way of introduction, Chair, so we don't waste time because this meeting is supposed to last until 8 o'clock. We know that historically SAA has been in a good performing airline on the one hand, but also one that has a history of mismanagement, and as a result has declined in performance over many years. And of course, it was badly affected, or wrecked as I call it, during the period of state capture as well, whether it is SAA the airline, SAA Technical, which was a superb international facility in terms of maintenance and repair of aircraft, and which today also finds itself in some difficulty as well. Secondly, we've mentioned this to you before, that South Africa is what you call a end of hemisphere destination. In other words, we are at the tip of the African continent, and pretty much like Australia or New Zealand or Argentina, we have that structural difficulty as far as that is concerned. The third element, or the second element under structural issues, is something we've mentioned in the past as well, and that is that airlines, as you can see right now, have huge problems and difficulties because of the low margins that they actually work with. And as a consequence, any rise, for example, of volatility in jet fuel prices or geopolitical events or other disruptive events. We have had the SARS virus before. We've had 9/11 in the United States before. We've had other forms of viruses in different parts of the world. And now, of course, we have COVID-19 do cause a substantial disruption to air travel and impacts on the profitability. So if you look at the global situation today, any number of major airlines have been grounded, either in their entirety or in respect of the majority of their fleet. Various airlines have either dismissed or what is furloughed members of the staff, anything from 5,000 up to 20,000 or more, some getting paid, some not getting paid. The furloughed ones do get some pay as a consequence. And in some, the third section under COVID-19, that the airline industry is not going to recover or bounce back as if we have a V-shaped recovery. It's going to take a hell of a lot more, bigger pardon for the language, for that industry to recover. In case, we also have had an open skies policy, which meant that licenses were issued many different airlines, which meant more competition for SAA. And if you don't have a competent airline and a competent management and leadership, that creates difficulty as well. Of course, there are many who are raising the question, why is a national airline needed? And a national airline is not necessarily 100% owned by the state. It could have various partners. But we've answered that question ourselves, Chairperson, in the recent past, where repatriations were necessary, where students had to be picked up from Wuhan, for example, in the epicenter of the pandemic in China, and cargo from all parts of the world, particularly the East, but elsewhere also had to be arranged to be picked up, and it continues until today. And that cargo is in relation to personal protective equipment and other forms of donations and contributions that the South African state has received. And those repatriations will continue into this week, for example, when there'll be flights to the east, there'll be flights to the west, in order to collect South Africans who are stranded and who are able to pay. And even if they're not able to pay, there are some arrangements being made by the state in order to get them back to the country. So as I was saying earlier on, that virtually total grounding of major airlines has occurred. Loss of staff has been a feature. The spread of the infection by air travel is a risk that most countries are afraid of. The colleagues in the, okay, now they're getting to SAA. And therefore, many borders across the world are either totally closed or significantly closed, pretty much like South Africa. And even in traffic in the so-called Western countries between Europe and the United States has been interrupted as a consequence as well. The best wisdom in this regard from those who are familiar with the aviation industry is that it will take a very long time before the industry recovers. The view is that domestic will start off on a slow basis, regional, whether it's in the continent here or Europe or elsewhere, will be the second starter, so to speak. But one of the challenges in terms of the business model that would be affecting the airline industry is how do you achieve social distancing? And so if there is to be a 1 to 2 meter distance between every passenger that's on an aircraft, so think about the last time you flew, you'll probably have a 30% or so load factor. In other words, for every 100 seats on an aircraft, only 30 people will be sitting on a seat because you've got to keep your distance, wear a mask, and take the other precautions that need to be taken. It then means that the cost of travel is going to be phenomenally higher, and it will also begin to impact upon the profitability of airlines as well. So in many cases, it is predicted that anything between 18 and 36 months is what we're talking about. Maybe slightly less when it comes to some domestic travel in some countries. But if you're talking about international travel on the kind of scale that we've seen before, it's not going to be anywhere near that which we've seen before. And organizations like IATA on the aviation side, WHO on the health side, have all made their calculations and presented various models in this regard. And so international will be a slow starter, and many planes will remain on the ground, whether it is in factories that produce them, in Seattle or in Paris or whatever the case might be, in the case of Boeing and Airbus. But we also know that airlines that have ordered aeroplanes were about to take delivery prior to COVID-19 are no longer taking delivery. And so that has consequences for the airline industry in terms of the manufacturing side of the industry. But if somebody has enough money, then now is the time to start to make some deals in terms of refleeting an airline, if you have the cash, and getting the appropriate aircraft for the kind of routes that you actually want to travel. In many countries, but not in all, some governments are giving consideration, like the British government, for assistance to airlines. Others have given conditional assistance, as in the case of the United States, to basically pay staff but not pay anything else. Others, like the Norwegian government, have, I think in the last week, set aside some 700 million pounds to assist the Norwegian airline. But the Scandinavian airline, on the other hand, is in trouble. I think the Australian government might be considering some assistance to Qantas, although it is now a private sector organization in its own right. So, from our point of view, what is essential as we go through the business rescue process, as far as SAA is concerned and its various entities, that we attempt to look at how that is the key mission, if you like, of a business rescue practitioner. You can either liquidate if you don't see any hope for restructuring and reviving a business, or you say that this business is rescuable. And if it is rescuable, a new type of airline must actually emerge, which is viable, which is competitive, and restructured as a result of the efforts of business rescue. And I'll come back to some of that in a moment. And in our case, we are saying, given the unemployment level, we should have no dependence on the fiscus, and get strategic equity partners and partnerships in various forms to support any new venture that gets off the ground. The business rescue process itself is one where, as I said, the role of the practitioners is to restructure a business, to inverted commas rescue it so that it would operate normally. The business rescue practitioners are still in charge of SAA, although the board is in place, but they are the effective bosses on a day-to-day basis, and they make the decisions. An amount of 5.5 billion rands from two different routes was made available in December and soon thereafter for post-commencement finance. And so 5.5 billion rands has been spent in the last 5 months, something that we've been questioning in terms of the sole discretion that the BRPs have in terms of legislation, although the PFMA and so on apply to them as well. But these are matters of accountability that we are getting into and have been interrogating for a little while. Forgive the language here, the double butts, but what we've had in recent days is an announcement by the practitioners that all flights, repatriation or otherwise, will stop on the 8th of May. Just before I got onto this call, the department had an interaction with the BRPs, and there's now some indication of maybe some flexibility in this regard if we can find savings from within the 5.5 billion rands that we are talking about. And there are other contributions that are being made in this regard, which I'll come back to as well. In our view, if this wind down process that the business rescue practitioners seem to be on at the moment continues as they propose, it will not serve the original objectives that we set for the business rescue process. And that is also a matter of contention between the shareholder and the business rescue practitioners. We have written and engaged the practitioners on several important issues. Firstly, on the question of access to information. So, for example, an American aviation consultancy was brought in on the recommendation of the lenders who lent the 2 billion rands initially to be the aviation advisors. But that firm did work which resulted in fees something like 30 to 35 million rands being paid to them. But we haven't seen the product of what they've actually done. And so we want full access to all of that information so we can evaluate whether we had value for money in that regard. We have called on the business rescue practitioners themselves and all of the consulting entities that they have brought in, which include some accounting firms, to actually reduce their fees anything up to 40%, so that they also contribute, like the staff would be contributing, to a proper outcome of this process. We haven't heard from them in this particular regard. We're engaging with one of the consultancies on a reduction on fees. And again, it's the trade unions that have come to the party, as I will indicate in a moment, with magnanimous gestures on their part. They were supposed to produce management accounts for the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, which they have not been able to do till date. And in the next 48 hours or so, we will be meeting with them to examine finances to see how much of money can be found to give as much continuity as possible beyond the 8th of May. That we also want to indicate that there should be no fire sale of important assets of SAA, nor should there be any movement towards liquidation when in fact there are many alternatives that can in fact be pursued. And as I said earlier on, government expects SAA as the national flag carrier to take responsibility by being paid for the repatriation process. But also, there are huge opportunities on the cargo side to, in fact, earn income in this process as well. So some of the legal issues that we are contending with is when exactly is a proper and fully fledged business rescue plan going to be presented. And at best, what we have given to us yesterday morning is, let's call it an outline, but much of it is about history. Not too much of it is about what the solution is, but we want to engage in constructive engagements with the practitioners about alternate routes to a constructive outcome of the business rescue process. And by that we mean we need to understand what should the shape of a new airline be, and we've invested as a department a fair amount of energy, time, and the retention of experts to give us a design of a potential future airline, which should be completed shortly. And so what's the migration route from between where we are at this point in time and where we want to get to? But the one thing that we must be absolutely clear is that the old SAA as it exists will not exist into the future, partly for the reasons that it was not competitive and unviable as it was at that particular point in time, but also because of the whole environment, both within aviation and in the economy more generally, has changed very significantly. And nobody can quite anticipate what air travel is going to be like even 2 months down the line as we go. There is a Section 189 process that the business rescue practitioners had initiated with some of the trade unions, while others had refused to be part of that process. But I will address that in a moment in a different section. And the Companies Act does prescribe that where important decisions are to be made by the business rescue practitioners, there must be adequate consultation with the shareholder. And our view is that that hasn't been entirely the case. But these are matters that in a bilateral session we will be raising as we have raised before. We believe that there is an alternative, if you like, transition process that is possible, and we will be putting forward those proposals to the business rescue practitioners, as I said, in the next 48 hours or so. depending on when the meeting is scheduled. The purpose of a business rescue plan ultimately is to say this is our plan to get the business to a viable future. And of course, it has to be voted on by various classes of creditors. And the shareholder has certain very narrow prerogatives in this regard as well, although not as broad as other creditors. But the main creditors, as you know, are the banks in South Africa that have lent SAA over time 9.2 billion rands plus interest. And that has been originally catered for in what the Minister of Finance had announced before in I think the MTBPS. We over the last 3 weeks have started a process of consultation with the 8 labor unions that are part of and recognized in SAA. And over the 3-week period, we have built an interesting level of trust and consensus in terms of what kind of new airline we would like, and understanding that the new airline wouldn't return to the old past, and understanding that the current conditions mean that there will be, if you like, a slow and gradual takeoff, whether it's of an existing airline or of the new airline that we're talking about. And yesterday, there was a one-day workshop with the trade unions using the digital media, in which they fully participated in a design process, sharing their thoughts and their experiences on various aspects, from routes to types of aircraft to what a maintenance organization should or should not be doing, and so on and so on. So one of the things that we would like to talk about, both within that forum and with the business rescue practitioners, is a more consensual approach to Section 189, on the understanding that not every employee is going to be re-employed in the new airline. And if there are other airlines in South Africa that go through similar difficulties, they will have similar issues to contend with as well. And so what we need to do in a responsible way is to put together a social plan which will have various dimensions that will in essence look after the welfare of labor, but also change the way in which business is done at airports and at airlines, so that there's a different way of accommodating as many workers as possible. The kind of furlough system that is operating in some countries, or the work sharing system that is operating in places like Germany, are all out of the box kind of thinking that needs to be applied, so that as many families as possible have income. And as you know, one of the effects of the lockdowns because of COVID-19 is the deprivation of income for families, which can have a devastating effect. And all of us as public officials, I do believe, have a responsibility to ensure that we find some kind of income from whatever source, whether it's the new COVID funding, whether it's the UIF funding, or any other system that we can co-develop with the trade union movement. So those discussions are continuing, and we hope that the kind of constructive spirit that we have seen amongst the trade unions will then converge with what hopefully might turn out to be constructive discussions with the practitioners themselves. However, in relation to Section 189, tomorrow there is an important court case that is linked to the unions at SAA, where 2 of the unions, supported by several others, is in the labor court challenging the fact that without a business rescue plan being presented, Section 189 is being executed. There are previous, I'm not a lawyer, but there are previous judgments in this regard, but the NUMSA and the Cabin Crew Association believes that these are matters that should be reviewed by a court, and in particular labor court, so that there's more clarity about the sequencing of events because the logical question they ask is how do you work out how many people to keep or fire if you don't show us what the new route structure is going to be, how many aircraft you're going to have, what kind of staffing model do you have, what ratios of staff per aircraft are you going to have, which is the international standard, and you don't make that the subject of some consultation with ourselves. The next section, chairpersons, is developing a new model, as I said earlier on, and that is happening on 2 tracks at the moment, and potentially a 3rd track. The 2 track is the engagements with unions, like the one we had yesterday. The second is the consultancy that has worked with SAA before, which is also doing some design work, taking into account the global developments that have occurred and the global benchmarks that are available. And the third, potentially, is the work done by this consultancy that was brought on, whose reports remain a mystery to us at this point in time. So the key issue is how do you transition, as I pointed out, from the old to the new? And even the new is something that doesn't start at an optimal level. It's important to repeat and repeat and repeat. All airlines are going to start on a small scale, and depending on the market situation, are going to grow in terms of whatever they have to offer.
Can somebody tell or inform the minister that he's muted, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Minister.
Yes, we can.
I put my paper on the computer, so apologies for that. On the finance side, as I said, 5.5 billion rands has been spent. We are questioning some of the payments to consultants. We believe that more could have been done in respect of cost savings, and we want that deadline of May to be reviewed. What is still to be canvassed a lot more intensely is the future of South African Airways technical, which both SAA requires and the airline industry requires as well, and has a lot of potential to become an important player, at least in the Southern African context, if not beyond that as well. Mango, which has been a reasonably well-run airline, and we're waiting to see what kind of developments there are both globally and here in respect of what I call low-cost airlines and what their future is. And airships, which produces the food that airlines consume, but which has also taken its own steps like Mango has. Mango, for example, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, has voluntarily taken a 50% cut in their salaries. And that's the point I want to add in relation to the trade union consultations. I think all of them, if not the majority of them, have in fact agreed to take a 50%, or let's say a cut in salary, and depending on your income level, there's a step up and a step down in a particular formula that can be utilized. But I think workers need to be commended for taking that step, and the higher earners will take a bigger cut, and the lower earners take no or very little of a cut in their salaries, so that money could be utilized to help SAA go beyond the end of May. So to sum up on SAA, we have an institution that is still in business rescue. It has the potential to be restructured into something new, which is what government wants. In that new arrangement, there could be strategic equity partners, and we're receiving all sorts of offers, but some are suspect and some are vacuous and some may be of substance. So they will be evaluated by a team of experts. and not ourselves. But fourthly, we need to find some quick answers in terms of how do we extend the work that SA is doing under the current conditions beyond May. And then lastly, we want a constructive resolution to the transition from the old to the new, and that is going to be the subject of further discussions as we go forward as well. So a lot of this is if you like, work to be completed, and I can't tell you whether I'm optimistic or not, but we can certainly say to you that every effort will be put in to make sure that we move in the right kind of direction. So, chairpersons, with that, I end the SAA presentation, and I'm going to ask Mr. Director to make his presence felt, and we move on to Eskom. And with his appointment, Eskom has made some significant strides in some of the areas which he will outline to you, chairpersons. And amongst those is what have they been doing about COVID-19 and what effect has this economic shutdown and of course the restart now by moving from level 5 to level 4 had on Eskom, both in demand terms and in revenue terms. Secondly, they've used this opportunity of the last 2 months or so to accelerate short-term maintenance, and they will explain what kind of work they've been doing and some of the achievements that they've brought on board. And thirdly, we were in the process of getting additional energy so that some leeway can be obtained for these repairs to actually take place in terms of the more substantial repairs and maintenance work that needs to be done. And lastly, he will show you or indicate to you what has been done in relation to the implementation of the Eskom roadmap paper, which, as you might remember, said that Eskom needs to be over time divided into 3 entities: generation, transmission, and distribution. So now we start the magical game, chairpersons, and that is, where is Mr. Director?
Good evening, Minister. Good evening,
yes.
chairpersons, honourable members. If there is a presentation that can be put on the screen, alternatively, I can just talk to the presentation that was sent out. I don't know if all the members got it.
The presentation should be put on. It was on earlier on. So if the committee staff could help us.
Right, Minister, while that is happening, let me start along with your permission, please. So
Sorry,
first
can I also ask the IT people to put something there on Eskom, not on SAA?
Yes, we're doing that.
Right.
Can I just, in the meanwhile, record my presence as the interim chair of Eskom? Hello?
Yeah, hello, I'm saying you are welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Continue, Mr. Retal.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So the first major impact, obviously, that COVID-19 has had was that we saw a very drastic drop in demand, on average about 7,500 megawatts, and that has peaked at 9,000 megawatts. The pattern of consumption has also changed in that we have seen that the morning peak has by and large disappeared. The evening peak has become far more pronounced, and the night dip has also become far more pronounced, and that has created difficulties for us in order to manage the stability of the system, but we have been managing reasonably well with the assistance of our colleagues in generation. We have taken up to 11 units out of service and put them in cold reserve from time to time. These are brought back as the system demands it, and we are getting quite good at taking these units out and then returning them to service. So I've got a very high degree of confidence that when demand recovers fully, that we will see us able to meet the demand by returning those units to service. We have seen a dramatic reduction in consumption from the mining and industrial sector. We anticipate that after accounting for lost revenue due to lower sales, as well as to the fact that we have been saving on primary energy, in particular on coal, that we have seen a reduction in cash generation for April of some 2.5 billion rand. The full financial impact will still need to be assessed. We have been unable to conduct the so-called philosophy or reliability maintenance because these require longer shutdown periods. We have also experienced restrictions on the movement of people and contractors, particularly contractors from abroad. And we have augmented that with short-term opportunity maintenance, and we anticipate that we'll be able to reduce our partial load losses by some 2,000 megawatts, which is, of course, very pleasing as we head into winter. So we have moved some outages out, in particular Koeberg 2. Koeberg 2 has had to be moved out because of the requirement for us to bring in, first of all, inspectors from the International Energy Agency from Austria. International air travel is at this point in time quite difficult, but also in order to do the actual general overhaul at Koeberg, we have to bring in technicians from France. And again, that is causing us challenges, but we have had very good cooperation and support from inter alia, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and also from the Department of Health, and we are making headway on those. We've been able to accelerate some of our maintenance programs, in particular Kusile 1, Maduba 4 and Maduba 6, and we have increased our maintenance to some 6,700 megawatts. Partial load losses, we are targeting a step change in partial load losses from about 7,800 megawatts to some 4,300 megawatts, and we believe that that will give us a reliable capacity improvement due to the opportunity maintenance that we've conducted during the lockdown so far of some 2,000 megawatts. So we see that there is a high degree of confidence, P80 confidence interval, that after lockdown we will see the initial 31 days of stage 1 load shedding that we had anticipated for the next quarter being reduced to only 3 days based on the partial load losses being reduced by 2,000 megawatts. On the screen there at the moment, you see the capacity outlook, and you can see the dark blue area in the middle of the slide that grows. That is the additional capacity that we are creating based on the opportunity maintenance that we are conducting at the moment. So we are taking advantage of the very unfortunate circumstances that are associated with this global pandemic. Moving on to the system outlook status, the next slide. Under scenario 1, you can see there that we anticipate very little load shedding during the P80 scenario, and we will consume relatively limited quantities of diesel during this scenario. However, as you know, the Eskom system is unreliable and unpredictable, and therefore we have developed 2 further scenarios. But at this point in time, we are working very hard to deliver scenario 1. And I would dare say that there are further opportunities for us to improve on those 3 days of load shedding, of course, the longer that lockdown continues. Right, moving on to the next slide, that's essentially the improvement from 31 to 3 days. I've already addressed that. If we then move on to the reliability maintenance, we have put in place a steering committee. We are running this as a project. We have not let the lockdown slow us down. We have approved for 11 power stations the relevant structures to put this in place. We have a team that's visiting power stations, and we are rolling out in a very structured way our maintenance program and dealing with original equipment manufacturers in order to improve the reliability and stability of our system. Moving on to the HR processes, we are going to be making use of some short-term opportunities to bring in skills from outside in order to assist us in improving our project execution capability. We're also very pleased that a group of 60 retired Eskom engineers have offered their services to come and assist us. Most of those have indicated that they are prepared to do so free of charge and just on a reimbursement of their costs basis. So this is a very good form of national service, I would say. And we are going to be assessing their skills and experience and placing them at the power stations in order to ensure that we can transfer skills and ensure that we run our operations successfully. We intend to kick off on the 1st of June 2020, and by then we anticipate all of our structures will be in place to start with the reliability maintenance. And there's a list of the power stations there which you will be familiar with, and then we are communicating with staff as well as with contractors, and also receiving a lot of support and cooperation from our colleagues in organized labor. We have also taken steps not only to improve, if we move on to the next slide, the supply of electricity, but we are also managing the demand inter alia by load management before and during load shedding. And these interventions include opportunities to use the so-called traffic light system, and on average that liberates about 100 megawatts of capacity. And I'd like to thank the South African public for cooperating with us and supporting us in these initiatives to switch off energy-hungry appliances during peak times. We have also started to look at procuring electricity from a number of entities that have spare capacity available, and we have a wholesale electricity pricing scheme that will add about an estimated 50 megawatts to the system. There are various short-term power procurement programs that we anticipate will add about 130, and then another 130 coming from additional capacity that we are targeting from renewable energy IPP projects. So that will in total add by the end of the year about 900 megawatts of additional capacity. And once you start adding the 900 to the 2,000, then you can see that we are building in sufficient buffer capacity. If I may then move on to the progress with the Eskom roadmap, we are working quite hard, as you can tell, with the opportunity to stabilize the business. We then need to optimize, and as part of the optimization, we are divisionalizing transmission, distribution, and generation under Eskom Holdings. And we anticipate that this will bring far greater focus to our business and will eventually lead to a lean and efficient Eskom with a reduced and optimized cost base. In the longer term future, we see that there is a future for a lower carbon energy mix with greater opportunities for participation in generation by private capital. And part of the objective of divisionalization is to enable exactly that through the creation of additional investor confidence. If we move on to the next slide, you can see there that we have made good progress with divisionalization. We have appointed the boards, we've appointed managing directors at no additional cost, I might add. We have already had board meetings for all three divisions. It's very successful. I think the business focus is starting to take hold, and my colleagues are coming to grips with the necessity of managing an income statement in a very active and very positive way. So we are on track to enable, in the fullness of time, the legal separation of the three divisions of Eskom in accordance with the roadmap for a restructured electricity industry as published by the Department of Public Enterprises. Moving on to the next slide, it is clear there that we've made good progress on the so-called relinking, which is the redeployment of staff from head office functions into the businesses and into the power stations. So very good progress there. We are putting in place financial reporting from an income statement point of view. That is in place, but at this point in time, we are still developing the methodology for allocating an appropriate amount of debt to each of the divisions. That, of course, is one of the major challenges that Eskom faces, the 450 billion rands worth of debt. And as I've said, we have made good progress in dealing with the appointment of the divisional boards. And I think there's a new energy and a new focus on the bottom line that is starting to take hold in Eskom. With that, Honourable Chairperson, Minister, I would like to pause and hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. Now with chairpersons, we move to Transnet. We have the new CEO, Ms. Portia Darby, and the chairperson, Mr. Molefe. And what they will outline is the progress they've made with creating a new management team post the capture period that they've been through. Secondly, how COVID-19 has been prepared for, because you have large groups of people in Transnet working on rail or at the ports. But secondly, what the impact of COVID-19 has been on global trade and how it impacts particularly on ports and rail. Thirdly, they will give you some sense for some of the operational challenges and what their plans are at the ports. There is a shortage of certain types of equipment, but notwithstanding that, how they are coping with the cargo that's coming in. And at the early stages under level 5, they had the tough task of actually distinguishing between essential and non-essential cargo. And in many ways, that was a huge challenge. It caused congestion at the Durban port in particular. But they've found ways now, as they will explain to you, to overcome that particular challenge. Freight rail and some of the challenges that they face there and how they intend to overcome that and increase, in fact, the market share of general freight in South Africa. And then look at the corporatization of the Ports Authority, which has been on the agenda for a long time. And they've begun to make progress in that direction as well. And what they see as the global picture at this point in time of goods moving around, particularly commodities and containers, What are some of the volumes that they're seeing leaving the country or entering the country? And clearly, in a situation where there's a global recession and perhaps worse, and there are border-related issues across the world, they at Transnet, particularly at the ports of entry, will experience many difficulties in that regard. So if I may, let me hand over to Ms. Darby, and she'll take you through the presentation.
Excuse me, before Minister, at the risk of being unkind to you and your team, I will suggest that you try to be a bit briefer so that at least by 7:30, members have an opportunity to raise their questions, because I think that session is also very important.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will be very brief.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Chair. So I'll try and focus fundamentally on COVID and the response there too. So fortuitously, I mean, despite the lockdown, I think when we started watching, when WHO made the announcement of it being a pandemic, we quickly were aware that it would have a very direct impact on us. We had partnered by then with the Port of Singapore, and we were watching what was happening around the world to volumes that were moving on ships. So we set up a team and have worked quite actively with the department and also with the private sector in trying to navigate what has really been a difficult period. As the Minister says, as because these were first times we were having to operate in this very strange situation. So when the first instructions directives were we could offload essential cargo, the question was, what then do we do with non-essential cargo? And once we've solved that problem is that once you've offloaded the non-essential cargo, what do you do with it? Because you can't leave it at the port. It has the possibility of creating congestion. I think in a funny way, as often crises are able to do, we were then able to actually establish quite a very good working relationship with the port community, SARS, as well as some of the freight owners, and were able to move quite a lot of the containers out, rail them to City Deep and as many of the bonded warehouses as we were able to find. To be honest, at this point, most of the warehouses are full, and so we look forward to the economy as it opens up, because we're quite nervous about being in a situation where we are at this stage 4, where cargo is still moving in. We're moving all of the cargo, and the rest of the economy is not increasingly opening, because we're then going to have another serious bottleneck on the storage side. If I can ask that we go to the next slide. So as we started looking at the impact of COVID, because during the lockdown period, we had 50% of our staff operational, and that was our strategy to try and protect ourselves from any infection, and also to ensure that we were able to have crews at home so that if we had to quarantine a section, we would be able to have staff available as well. Furthermore, at about the same time, you would know that only open-cast mines were much later unable to operate, and underground mines closed. So the revenue effect, we were quite worried. So we had about 4 or 5 days where we closed even the ore lines, which led to quite a hit on revenue. But shortly thereafter, the Sishen iron ore line and the Port of Saldanha were pretty much functional, with iron ore and manganese moving down that line. We had some of our container terminals opened, but most of the bulk, we basically went into a much slower staff allocation. We've spent the period also starting to look at what the possible scenarios would be. So we had the scenario 1, which is optimistic, is that if we have a quick bounce back, even with the quick bounce back, we face quite a significant revenue reduction of about 8.9 billion rand, with a more what we think maybe a more realistic scenario with an extended soft lockdown, because we remain quite worried as the economy opens. as it opens, are we going to find ourselves then back into a 5, or are we going to be in a linear program, in a linear path towards level 1? And there we're 12.25. We've been very careful to make sure that we introduce greater efficiencies in our operating costs. And so pretty much in the same way as Eskom are working hard to compress our costs and keep and ensure that our maintenance continues as per plan. Also, as a result of the reduction in volumes that we anticipate for the rest of the year, it may have an impact on revenue, but it gives us a little bit of room to fast track our maintenance. But that's on condition, though, that the rest of the maintenance industry and the supplies that we need for some of our parts and equipment is able to reach us in South Africa as well. So it's an interesting situation that we are trying to do the best to make use of. If you go to the next slide. Obviously, board portfolio members would know all of the problems that we've had over the years with the security at City Deep. What we did for this period was to increase our security because there's a lot of goods that were being stored there and could not leave City Deep. There, we've actually worked very well and cooperatively with the other depot owners in that area. As I've indicated, the heavy haul rail system from rail support in Saldanha functioned well. We're now in a situation with chrome, magnetite, and manganese are back up, and so our revenues are starting to look quite well. Actually, in this period, with 50% of our staff operational, we've been able to make about 60% of our forecast revenue for quarter 1. We are, though, this is the next slide is the one which has port equipment. We've had equipment that arrived. We have an interesting problem that we have to resolve currently. We normally get the equipment in kit form and we assemble it in South Africa. But we worry that with the lockdown or even a soft lockdown, we might not have enough crews. And also for as long as we can't have the foreigners, because the OEMs are supposed to support us to assemble this, it might delay our ability to deploy the equipment. So we have to figure out whether we just bring it into South Africa assembled. But we keep watching to see how we balance out, because this thing about replacing our equipment is actually quite essential on our side. Also, Durban, the decongestion is not. We right now don't have any problems whatsoever around congestion. There was a moment when we had some problems, but what this period also enabled us to do is to make mandatory the truck booking system. What that means is that we no longer have trucks. We will not allow, and we do not allow a truck into the port if it was not booked and it didn't have an appointment at that particular time. There's a lot of work that we obviously have to do around reducing the human interfaces at that point for protection of workers from infection, but it's looking quite good, and it's a priority area of investment and working with the municipality. We're also in the process of appointing a program manager, program director, who's actually going to coordinate all of the activities to ensure that all of the decongestion projects are implemented on time in the interest of Durban and its efficiencies. So I suppose, Chair, I'm trying to run towards to make your time. I've indicated that freight has managed to achieve 60% of its planned volumes, and we remain steadfast on that one. Coal has become is worrying us a little, coal exports, because with India in lockdown, it means that coal exports have significantly reduced. Over the last year or so, Transnet Freight Rail has actually made significant investments to improve the track. So speed restrictions are what we put in whenever the track is not too safe. And we made so if the design of the system is for 60 kilometers an hour for a train, and we may reduce it to 40, 30, and in some areas, unfortunately, really low to 20 kilometers an hour. Now, it is that which takes away the slots that we have available. We've now significantly reduced the areas where there are speed restrictions, especially on the NAT corridor. And I think, as the minister has indicated, general freight is a really important area that we want to grow in the period going forward. And we need to do better on general freight, because this is what will enable us to achieve the government strategy of a shift from road to rail. So as indicated, maintenance, we remain resolute that we will spend the money that we have to spend, and we're spending it ourselves directly, but we're also we'll be working a lot more closely with some of our partners whom we already have, who help us with the maintenance in the system. I mean, a real issue which remains, and we keep talking about this, is around procurement of major materials. We are, as the minister was indicating, still cleaning up Transnet. We're finding, and we're trying to resolve quite quickly some of the irregularities on the procurement side. But it's a focus area for us, because if we don't fix that area, our ability to support in stimulating economic activity is going to be somewhat constrained. Doing a lot of work to deal with security. We've seen a sizable increase of fuel theft in the pipeline, and it's especially starting to extend into the Mpumalanga area. And we need to deal with that, because it's not only the cost of the leakage of the fuel, it's actually the environmental costs that we are having to deal with. To nearly end, the issue of TNPA, ministers indicated, we are working very hard to make sure that we corporatize TNPA. However, and especially with COVID, this revenue impact has an impact on some of our covenants as Transnet, some of the conditions for our covenants. So we've got to be very careful about how we restructure the balance sheet. But as members would know, a virtual balance sheet already exists for TNPA so that it can be regulated as a separate entity. But we have made a commitment that by the beginning of the next financial year, it will be corporatized as a standalone subsidiary, but under the 100% ownership of Transnet, as a subsidiary of Transnet. So to end on outlook, we're quite worried that with the general global slowdown, which I think all of us have been seeing, in fact, crash really around the world, our mainstay, which is iron ore, manganese, and coal, might suffer. We don't think that manganese is going to suffer as much as coal may, but if India starts to open up, coal will also start to move. But there's the other issue on the other side of the equation, is that what prices are the commodities going to be moving. We are putting a lot of effort to work more proactively with cargo owners in South Africa, particularly auto sector, which exports, and all the general exporting industries, to see how we might be able to help each other, including agriculture. This year, we've got a bumper oranges crop, and we're making sure that all of agricultural produce moves out of South Africa on time. To end, I mean, members would often hear complaints about the tariff costs at Transnet. We are working diligently to arrive at a pricing model which takes into account our operating costs on the one hand, but most importantly, it takes into account the fact that as a logistics service provider, our job is to make sure that the South African economy and South African enterprises are able to compete globally, and we'll be sorting out what our cross-subsidies look like. Minister, I think I can stop there and would be willing to take any questions.
That's fine. We've met the chairperson's deadline.
Yeah.
Thank you, honorable members. Thank you, Minister, and your team. I think now my time to chair this meeting reach an end. I will give over to the chairperson of the select committee to take over and facilitate the question and answer session. Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and thanks to the Minister for the presentations. We are going to the session on questions. I have checked the members that are present here. From the NA, we have got 12 honorable members. From the NCOP, we have got 9, meaning that we've got 21 members that must put clarity-seeking question. I would put forward a proposal that says we need to look at 2 strategic questions or 3 minutes for each member, and 2 strategic questions. I will take two questions from the NA, 2 questions from the NCOP, going on like that, so that we share the space for clarity-seeking questions. The other thing that could assist us is that we avoid preambles. We just go straight to clarity-seeking question. I'll just put this question because it has been a major concern, so that members don't repeat it. The question on the documents, Honorable Minister, there is an outcry that the documents arrived a bit late, and members are unable to engage on the documents. But I will open for questions to members.
Honorable Klute, please.
Honorable Klute from the NCOP, Honorable Bibi from NCOP. In that order.
Honorable NCOP.
I'm taking two for now. I'll come back.
Member Arnold's MCO.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I've noted you, honorable members. Honorable
NA. Noted me, Chair, for the next round. For the next round, Gwenya. Yes. For the next Chair. Thank you.
Can we have Honorable Klute to ask questions?
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Minister, and all the presenters for your presentation tonight. So let's just jump right to the question. As I understand it, we're looking at a new SAA and
Honorable Chair. Honorable Chairperson.
Can I continue?
Members, can we mute the mics while another member is speaking?
Okay, so we're looking at a new SAA. I understand that maybe now the minister might not be able to give us the outline or the details of the business model, but listening to what he said, we're looking at a new airline. My question is, launching a new airline is a very costly exercise. And we heard him saying that he's asking actually private partners to be part of this airline. My question is, one, is there actually any private companies that would be interested in SAA at this stage? And where will the money come from for this new SAA? The other question, he did mention a few other airlines. I would just like to know, SA Express at this stage, where are they? Because we all know it is hard times for airlines. So SA Express, where are they at this stage? And what are the outlook for that airline as well? And then a question on Eskom, and I've heard about what the demand changing, the demand cycles changing, but I need to ask you one question all South Africans is asking now. How did we manage to keep up the lights on suddenly? Because we heard during the State of the Nation address, the President saying load shedding is imminent for South Africa. That was pre-COVID-19. So my question actually is, will load shedding be more imminent as the coronavirus outbreak is being handled better and managed better, and we'll go to level 3, 2, and 1? Are we looking at more imminent load shedding in South Africa? That's my question. Thank you.
Honorable Bibi.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Chair. Greetings to the members from NA and also NCOP, and also greetings to the two chairs and also to the minister and the officials. First, Chair, I'd like to share my sentiments on this presentation that we're getting. It's a pity that you didn't have any documents to interrogate thoroughly so that you will be competent into this meeting today. We just got the presentation now. But nevertheless, I've got only one question, just to check with the department, whether the department ever considered downgrading some SOEs from Schedule 2 of the Public Finance Management Act to Schedule 3 to avoid them being highly indebted. So when I speak about Schedule 2, I mean it's borrowing money as they see fit. And also when we speak about Schedule 3, it's where borrowing powers are limited to Treasury approval. I just seek, clarity, the answers on that question, sir. Thank you so much.
So can I come in at
Thank
some
you very
point?
much. The NA.
Can I come in at some point from the NA?
Honorable Malinga from NA.
Chair,
Chairperson.
I've recognized. Sorry,
Yes,
members, I've
earlier
recognized.
on, Chairperson, earlier on there was a suggestion that we should write question on the chat thingy, and we did, and I'm number 2 according to that chat thing. So can I be recognized, please?
Is Honorable
Maudwe
and yourself. You'll be number. Yeah.
Chair, did you recognize me?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Honorable
Shabalala as well, please.
Yes.
And Katalia as well, please.
Yes.
Also, Malinga, Chair.
Yes, you are starting. You are number 1. Can you start? Can you start, Honorable Malinga?
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. Greetings, colleagues. My question is only
I think this whole thing is it's just getting mixed up. Chairperson. Chair.
We can't hear you, Honorable Member. We are taking 2 questions from the NA, 2 questions from the NCOP, and 2 questions from the NA and 2 questions from the NCOP. So it's time for NA members to take questions. So can we allow them to do in that order?
Thank you, Chairperson. My question, I only have one question. Let me welcome the presentation by the department, not go to the preambles. Chairperson, with the mining sector on level 4 being opened, I just want to check with Eskom whether they'll be able to keep the lights on in the country. Because the reason why we had lights on, from what I've heard, is because of this load shedding. Or no, this lockdown. Are we going to be able to, is Eskom going to be able to keep the lights on with the mining company starting to work? Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay. The second one, number 2 from NA.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That was me. Firstly, Chair, I want to register my disappointment to the Minister of Public Enterprise. On the 16th of April, we wrote to him asking him to present, or rather to make available, the report on the corruption at Eskom that relates to the COO of Eskom. To date, we have not received any response from the Minister. Number two, on the 21st of April, we wrote a letter to the Minister of Public Enterprise asking him for the report to make available the business rescue practitioners report to us so that we can interrogate it, because there were reports that were coming from the media to say that SAs is going to be liquidated. And we wanted to read the BRP report and thirdly, to ask the minister directly whether he plans to privatize SAA. Clearly, the minister is untouchable and doesn't want to be held accountable. And I don't know why the minister accepted to be the minister in the first place if he does not want to be held accountable. Because as the executive, he should know that he needs to be held accountable. And we are therefore asking the minister to make those reports available. Those reports are not his private reports. They are the reports of the public. So as members of the public, we need to know what is happening in those spaces. Number three, we want the minister to come out clear and tell us whether, because he has already said he's going to privatize SAA. Now, he needs to take us into confidence and tell us whether the people who contributed to the CR17 campaign are the ones that are going to be buying SAA. That's one. Two, he went to Davos, and we want to know if the people that he met at Davos are going to be the ones who are buying SAA. So are we being sold? Is our assets being sold to Davos crew and to the CR17 crew? Number three, the issue of Transnet. I want the CEO to come out very clear and be honest. Yeah, no. You see, this is the problem. You bring the minister here who comes with three entities, and you want us to handle three entities within 2 hours, and we are given only 30 minutes to ask questions. When will the minister respond? In future, each entity must be given a slot. We can't have one minister coming with three entities and then forced to be told we must conclude. We are members of parliament. We want to hold the executive accountable, and as a result, we can't be treated like that. For the sake of time, I'm going to do the last one. To the CEO of Transnet, we want to know whether she intends to give the deal of Ghana to the entity that was opened by President Ramaphosa in 2018, a private entity called Gibela, because we are receiving reports that they are working to give that deal to Gibela. That's a multi-billion rand deal. So we want to know if Transnet is being used to give away the jobs that are supposed to go to our people to be given to Gibela. That's it. But Chair, please, this meeting must continue even next week and one entity at a time. Thank you.
Yeah, it's noted. I think
Can I be noted?
We'll liaise with the management and see what we can do, because I don't think we have done justice in terms of that. We are going to Chabalala, we are coming to you.
Chair, can we propose?
But also, can I be noted, Chabalala, here, please?
We have noted you, Honorable Chabalala. We are still going to, members of the NCOP will come back to you.
Chairperson Matibe, can I make a proposal, please? It's Piri, can I make proposal, Matibe?
Yes, we'll give you an opportunity when it is your time to speak.
Chairperson.
Can we allow members of the NCOP to speak? We are coming back to NA. Honorable Ngwenya and Honorable Mukause from the NCOP, in that order.
Thank you, Chairperson. presentation. Chairperson, I got about the document. We just get the document now, although you said we mustn't touch it. But I think that it is very important for us to speak if ever, Chair, we are not happy, because we used to tell the department, even if they come to our committees, that we want the document before we come to the meeting. Because if we don't have document before we come to the meeting, it's difficult for us to ask them questions, and it make our works clumsy. Chair, my question are two. One question, number one, what happened to the report of the
We are struggling to hear you, Honorable Ngwenya. I don't know whether
I can't hear Chairperson.
Presidential Review Committee, on which was approved by the cabinet together with the relevant government structures. What's wrong now?
Honorable Ngwenya, can you repeat that question? We could not hear it.
The second one.
No, we didn't hear your first question.
Hear the first one.
Yeah, repeat the first one.
I must repeat the first one. Chair, my first question, what happened to the report of the Presidential Review Committee on SOEs, which was approved by the cabinet to review the performance of the SOEs in order to achieve the development objective of South Africa? That's my first question. My second question, Chair, has the department, together with other relevant government structures, given effect to the implementation of the 31 recommendation of the Presidential Review Committee report? And if yes, what extent has the recommendation been implemented? And if no, why not? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Mukause. Honorable Mukause. We seem to have lost Honorable Mukause. Can I get another?
Thank you.
It's Chabalala here, Chairperson, from the National Assembly.
We are coming to you, Honorable Chabalala. We just want to get Honorable Mukause. Can you speak, Honorable Mukause? If we are unable to get, we must get two from the NCOP and then two from the NA. Can we get Honorable Nana? If we can't get Honorable Mukause, we'll give her an opportunity next time. Maybe is the next.
I'm here, Chairperson.
No, you are not Nana. Chair, thank you.
Honorable Nana.
Thanks, Chairperson. Chairperson, I would want to pose two or three questions. First one being, the Minister will know that the South African Airways as an airline was established in terms of an Act of Parliament of 2007. Now, with the much anticipated launch of the new airline, as the Minister has just alluded to it, does this mean that Parliament will have to repeal the old SA Act of 2007 and enact a new act, or the envisaged airline will operate based on the foundations of the SAA old act? That would be my first question, Chair. And the second question is, I know the minister didn't touch on other SOEs, but I have particular interest, Chair, in the situation at Denel Rheinmetall. You'll probably know that employees in the Wellington plant have been served with retrenchment letters. Now, what I would want to know, what I would want to know from the minister is the financial situation or the financial standing of that company. You will recall, Chair, that one of the reasons cited in the retrenchment letter that I've seen is the financial situation of the company. Is the minister in a position to give us a slightest glimpse as to what is happening in the partnership between Denel and Rheinmetall, insofar as retrenchment is concerned? And the last one, Chair, as you know again that I'm from the Eastern Cape, and in the nature of us in the NCOP, we become provincial bias. And the minister probably anticipates this question, and I've asked this question before, and I'll ask it again, because nothing has stopped. And the question goes to the CEO of Transnet. In Cradock in the Eastern Cape, we have a big problem of trucks that ferry manganese from the Northern Cape, and communities in that area have been crying for far too long, because those trucks are damaging the road infrastructure and are becoming a nuisance, particularly during night time, because they run 24 hours a day. Now, what is your plan, new CEO, insofar as fast-tracking, taking freight off our roads and back onto rail? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chabalala.
Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Chair. Firstly, Chairperson, I want to propose that perhaps you need to be assisted by the technical of this meeting. When a member is not recognized, they must be muted by the person who's perhaps assisting you to run the meeting. But I want to propose to members, given the fact that it's 1951, and the question will be practically, what is the practical steps that the minister will respond to all these things? The meeting is supposed to end in the next 5 minutes. So, and we have received the report, Chairperson, while we have started the meeting 6 minutes after. I'll propose, honestly, Chair, that I move a motion for members' consideration, whether from other opposition parties, DA, EFF, and other ones that are with us, that we look into having a portfolio committee for next week meeting, where we only divulge and deal with the deliberations on items that have been presented. These are huge entities. It's 3 entities in total. And these are entities that are bordering on our South African citizen, they're bordering on our economy, they're bordering on the lives of the people, whether COVID or not, either way, but of the employees of these entities, but the financial stabilities. So I feel, Chairperson, that we need to go back and look into the reports that have been furnished with us, appraise ourselves. Then I will move, Chair, that next week we'll look into just a meeting where we'll only be posing questions so that minister can answer. Right now, we'll really be doing injustice, and including to the South Africans that are watching there. There's so many questions that needs to be answered. And at this point, there's no way we're going to get those questions in 5 minutes. Even if you've extended an hour, it's not sufficient, Chair. So I'm really moving and appealing to other political parties that are here that can we look and say that all questions, we suspend everything, we look into the reports that will be given to us, we appraise ourselves, we arm ourselves, because there will be developments in any case in next week. Then we are able to immediately deal with the deliberations. And I also move, Chairperson, from your office that you consider having a 3-hour meeting. A 2-hour meeting is never sufficient. If the department will come here and present for 1.5 hours, it's really unpractical. So I really so move, Chairperson. I don't want to go to my issues of Eskom, Denel, whether it's Transnet. There's so many, but I'm really moving as a motion that can we consider having a portfolio committee just on deliberations based on the presentations that we've been given. I thank you.
Supported by the DA.
Thank you very much. There is a motion that has been put in place by Honorable Chabalala and Honorable Kachalia. I heard you supported the motion. We have a portfolio next week, a joint portfolio meeting where we deliberate on the 3 entities so that members can have time to deliberate. And
Chair.
Honorable Chair, just small clarity. Just small clarity, Chair. I'm sorry.
From the NCOP.
I have recognized you. Can I first deal with the motion that has been put in place?
Honorable Chair. Okay. Honorable Chair.
Yes.
Can I just clarify one thing? The issue of time is not of 7 o'clock, for example. It's of 2 hours. It's not an issue as such. We can continue beyond that. The only issue that I think Honorable Shabalala raised, which perhaps we have to consider, is only the issue of documentation, that we only receive it later. I think that one is an issue that we can consider. But we can continue now if honorable members still have a number of questions to raise. We still have time. Thank you.
Okay. Chairperson, we have got a motion that has been put in place and it has been seconded. We can only check if there are still members that want to have clarity questions while we consider.
Yes,
because
I'm here.
Yes, we have, Chairperson. We are here.
I'm here, Chairperson. Mukauche from the NCOP.
Yes, we're fine, Honorable Mukauche.
Honorable
we are just
from the
Can I continue,
honorable
Chair?
members, can we deal with the motion? The motion has been put, it has been seconded, it's fine. Honorable Mukause. Honorable Mukause, we have given you an opportunity to speak. We can't hear you.
Chairperson, can you hear me? Chairperson.
Yes, we can hear you speak, member.
Thank you so much. We've had this a number of times in the WIPS meeting and programming committee. The issue of time. This is the time that ministers must come and account either to select committees or to portfolio committees. The issue of time shouldn't be. Minister, what do you take of members of the SAA in particular, having received handouts from members of the community, simply because they did not receive their salary? Out of a human point of view, what do you take at that as a human minister? You spoke about not all members are going to retain their jobs. Yes, we understand that. But Minister, don't you think that you need to reduce the number of senior members within the SAA and the bloated staff within the SAA, and even close some of the offices which are not even serving a purpose at all? And Minister, you also spoke about consulting, some of consultants which are looking at bringing a new airline on board. Who appointed those consultants and who paid them? How were they appointed, Minister? We need some form of clarity on that, and we need some form of transparency. On the issue of Transnet, what is Transnet doing during this time of COVID-19 with its infrastructure, assisting the ailing economy of South Africa? Particularly, how are they assisting upcoming businesses in our local communities, Minister? I will stop there. But honestly, Chairperson, I don't want us to be suppressed because of time. We've got enough time. This is the time that ministers need to come and account to the portfolio committee and select committee. That proposals that you put and it was seconded, it is extremely wrong that we are in fact seconded it as members of parliament. Let us have the ministers to account here. Why is it that when is Minister Jamnandas who needs to come and account to the portfolio committee and select committee, members are jumping into conclusions that there's no time? We've got enough time. It's after 7 p.m. in the evening, and we've got a lot of questions to ask.
Thank you very much. Can I note, Honorable Kachalia, you had said you wanted to speak.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions.
Also be noted. Can I also be noted, Chairperson?
Yeah, we have noted.
I have a couple of questions on each entity. On SAA, I would like to know why there are still no annual financial statements provided and no management reports yet. Secondly, we hear about plans about the need for viable plans for the future, but none of these plans are presented yet by the business rescue practitioners as is required by the Companies Act. Then there's an interesting slide which was presented, which talks about the consolidation of ComAir. This is a very interesting proposal, and it opens up perhaps a can of worms. I would like to hear much more about this. Thirdly, there are trade unions, talk of trade unions coming to the party. I'd like to know what skin they are putting on the table, and secondly, is any change envisioned in the foreign ownership of airlines envisioned, which is now capped at 25%. On the question of Transnet, in respect of ports congestion caused by the demarcation between essential and non-essential goods, it has caused massive blockages, and there are huge demurrages being incurred. I want to know who will pay for this. I have written to the CEO, Ms. Phillips, about this some time ago. I have not got an acknowledgement, let alone a reply. Secondly, I want to know what maintenance Transnet in particular has undertaken during lockdown. Can we know what maintenance? This was an opportunity, and I'd like to know what maintenance was done. And thirdly, what provision was made, if any, for the provision of for the impact of lower prices on commodities, which are a major earner. On the question of Eskom, we are told that demand is down, revenue is down, and maintenance is down, but we still have confidence that we will meet the boosted demand when the lockdown is lifted. I'd like to understand in detail what informs this. Secondly, we talk about support from organized labor. I would like to know what tangible support they've done, because we've heard that there's tangible support from skilled employees in the sense of so-called national service. And thirdly, all scenarios presented call for diesel to meet the shortfall. What monetary provision has been made for this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we, honorable members, can we allow the minister and the team to respond? I'm still going to take hands for the second round. Yes, I'm still going to take the no. Still going to take, yes, we have noted you. We're still going to take the hands for the second round.
Chairperson, we still haven't.
Chairperson, can we maybe? Chairperson.
Chairperson, you must. There was an chair. Can you recognize me, honorable?
Please, Chairperson, can you recognize us?
Recognize me, honorable.
It's two members speaking. I can't hear.
Yes, because we have been asked to be recognized, Chairperson, and we haven't been recognized.
Okay. If we still have got members from the NA who want to be recognized, yes. I see the honorable member there and honorable Piri. Yes.
Yes.
Also myself, please. And I'm still waiting. I'm also waiting.
You can speak in that order. I'll go to the NCOP and then allow the minister to respond.
Okay, noted.
Okay. But before you proceed, Chair, there was a proposal. You did not rule it out. There was two issues. One, the proposal for Honorable Chabalala, it was seconded, and the other one, Chair, is somebody who just spoke and you never said anything about it. We still concur with the proposal that was brought before to say, Chairperson, you need to give us time. Documents were not came out in time. Therefore, we propose we must sit next week after we peruse all these documents. You must make a ruling on that before we proceed, Chair, please.
We have made a ruling. We have agreed that we are going to have a portfolio and joint portfolio and select committee next week. But there are members who said, even though we are going to have a joint and select committee next week, we still have got clarity seeking questions that we want to ask. So we're affording them the opportunity to ask while we note that we're going to have that committee next week.
Can I be recognized for my questions? Thanks.
Yeah, we have recognized you. We have allowed the first member to speak and then the second one. Yes.
Okay.
Honorable member, we have. Can you speak?
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Good evening, members. I want to echo the sentiment. I think it's very important for us to note that we need to be informed in time and we need to be finished with the documents in time, Chairperson, that we must not make a mistake of not recording. Equally, Chairperson, I want to ask the following questions. In terms of the SAA, what is the business model and how the business model of the new entity that is going to the new SAA, and how is it going to be financed? Again, Chairperson, on the same note, because the minister has indicated that there was corruption, and he said it vividly to say there was corruption in the SAA. Can the minister maybe take us into confidence as to who was found to be corrupt in the entity? And equally, what was the consequent management to that corruption? Because now we see as if the poor employees are the ones that are being dealt with, whilst the corrupt people are not, there's nothing even said about them. And again, Chairperson, I just want to know from the minister if he's aware that the employees as SA Express were not paid for March and April. And what is it that the minister is saying about that? Because those are the poor employees that are taking care of their families. Chairperson, in terms of Eskom, one would want to ask, because now we are in at the level 4 of the COVID-19. Can we be maybe put up to speed as to whether we will have the load shedding due to the increase in the demand, because now the companies have gone, people have gone back to work. So if there's going to be load shedding going forward, what measures or what is it that the Eskom is going to do? Because now we haven't seen load shedding, but now we are going to see it. It's for sure, it's given. Because with the reason why we didn't see load shedding is because the companies were not working, so there was less demand. Now the demand is getting higher. Thank you very much.
Honorable Piri. Honorable Piri. Honorable Piri. Okay, I think we have got a problem of network there. We'll come back to her for a question that she said she wants to ask. We can give the opportunity to the minister to respond. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Chairperson. And thanks to the members for the questions. I can't thank the one or two members for the kind of comments they've made, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Let me clarify, Chairperson, about the document question. The email requesting this meeting with us was signed off on the 30th of April. It was received in our email box at 8 p.m. on the 30th of April. The 1st of May was a holiday, and we first saw the email on Monday and did our best to prepare at a time when we are still working remotely. Not everybody is at work. In fact, very few people are at work, whether it is at each of these institutions or it is at DPE itself. So honorable members should be take that into account when they make some criticisms about the documentation. We had 3 working days to present the documents to you, in fact less, Honorable Chair. Secondly, in terms of ministerial accountability, I don't think we've ever been shy about that or reserved about that. And chairpersons, if you wish to continue until midnight this evening, you're welcome to do so. And certainly I'll be available, and I'm sure my colleagues from the various entities will be available as well. Thirdly, as a general remark, Chairperson, ideally when we're dealing with serious national matters like SAA, Eskom, and so on, we shouldn't bring our political axes with us and pass on insults in the process as well. So, you know, we're all adults, and I think what is important is that we are able, as members of parliament, to respect one another and leave the political battles for elsewhere. I don't think that people would like to be called by their nicknames or middle names or whatever the case might be. And I would expect that committee members who are representing the public as they claim, the few that have engaged in this conduct, would want to take some of these remarks into question, because we can have that political exchange and I'm quite willing to do that in a robust way if we have to. But let's get back to the question. There are several questions about SAA, the business model, where will the funding come from, what will the new airline look like. All of that, Chairperson, is in the process of being worked through. So there's nothing we can present to you. As a courtesy to you, we said to you that we would come and give you whatever information we can. Some of that is commercially sensitive information at this point in time as well. So Mr. Kachalia is laughing, but he should also, I'm sure, the honorable member understands how these processes work. And once we are ready and sure about how we're going to get out of the mess that we have inherited, we'll certainly come back to you, Chair, and give you whatever we can offer. There was a question raised about whether, for example, the business rescue report. We don't have I think one or two of you did mention the fact that, and it's in the report, that we don't have yet the tabling of a business rescue plan. I also clarified earlier on that in the next 48 hours, we intend to engage with the business rescue practitioners in a serious and constructive way so that we find the right way forward for what is an important national asset, which has many things in it that it shouldn't have, but it also has many valuable aspects to it that you wouldn't want to throw up in the air or get rid of or dispose of in an irresponsible way when we are responsible for those assets. So if you look at any of these aviation consultants, Chairperson, and you talk about a business model, the following are some of the questions that they look into, and anybody who wants to run an airline will look into. The first is, well, what are you as an airline? Are you a domestic airline? Or are you domestic plus regional? In our case, it'll be parts of Southern Africa or beyond that. Or are you domestic, regional, and international? And if you're international, which parts are you international? And what international destinations are important for you as a country? And what is important for us in our country is those countries with whom we trade, those countries from whom we get tourism, customers coming to our country, which forms a very important part of our GDP and our economy. The second question that they would ask you to answer is, which routes are you choosing, whether it's domestic, regional, or international? And again, because of COVID-19, as I explained earlier on, and the virtual chaos that it has caused in the aviation industry, both here on the African continent and beyond as well, you got to choose wisely which routes you're going to follow. But let's say there are 20 routes that you're going to actually fly. The third question is, what is your passenger traffic likely to be with each of those routes? So what kind of aircraft are you going to actually need? 100-seat aircrafts, 150-seat aircrafts, or 350-seat aircrafts? And that then helps you to decide upon the kind of fleet of aircraft that you actually need to get hold of. In South Africa, and in the case of SAA, you have a very mixed fleet, and most of the experts say that that fleet is not appropriate for the kind of business we intend to do in the pre-COVID period. In the post-COVID period, you'll remember me saying that seating arrangements on a plane will change, social distance would require a different kind of load factors, and how are all of those factors going to be taken into account in relation to the cost of running an airline, but also the profitability, which, if you remember, I also said was a very narrow profitability of about 5% on the average in most cases. So you've got to run a very efficient show. So what are you as an airline? Domestic, regional, international. Secondly, which routes? Thirdly, what kind of aircraft fleet? Fourthly, what kind of organizational structure would support the kind of fleet that you have and the routes that you have? Fifthly, how many staff do you then employ in that situation? Sixth, a measure of the staff compatibility with the business model is the number of staff per aircraft, normally in international terms. But it varies a lot. But despite all the variances that we actually have, SAA has the highest number of staff that we've seen per aircraft. And there are others who run it on a very thin basis, and there might have been previous presentations that we've done for you. If you answer all of those questions, the next is the financial model, right? How much of liquidity are you going to require? And as some of you said, where is the money going to come from? Are you going to buy the planes? Are you going to lease the planes? And of course, everybody is saying at the moment that because there are so many aircraft grounded across the world, and so many on the factory floor, so to speak, that are not being taken up by airlines, this is an interesting opportunity that any airline in South Africa would have if they had the cash, but also if they had the certainty about the kind of air traffic we're going to see into the future. So those would be some of the issues around the business model question that several of the honorable members have actually raised. On the question, and I'll refer to the questions on Eskom to our CEO at Eskom and then supplement anything that he might want me to add. But on the question of the downgrading of SOEs from Schedule 2 to Schedule 3, any borrowing by an SOE has to ultimately receive, particularly if you want guarantees, has to receive the approval of the Treasury in the first instance and of the shareholding department as well. But I'll look a little bit more closely into the schedules and see whether that actually makes a significant difference. I think in the one case they operate as commercial companies and in the other as state entities. But we'll clarify that with you the next time we meet, Chairperson. The related question was on mining. Remember that at level 4, mining is still not full scale at this point in time. There's a ramping up that takes place, but also importantly, as Minister Mantashe will point out to you, there are important health measures that need to be taken in order for workers to return to work, and those measures must be taken by the company concerned. The Honorable Ompile. The matter of the COO, which the acting chair of the board can confirm, has been resolved, and I'm not aware of any letter, but I'll try and find one. And particularly if the letter is in the name of a political party, we're not really obliged to answer, because we are talking to one another within the parliamentary system. And if there's a parliamentary question, we'll certainly respond to it and provide whatever information is required. On the question of the business rescue report, we'll respond. I've responded to that already. And I was almost going to say nonsense, but let me remove that and withdraw that, Chairperson. I refer to my opening remarks about mutual respect. When we talk about untouchable, that's part of the political narrative that comes from particular quarters. And once they sort out their relationship with a particular bank, they can come and raise other questions in the public domain. Whether we are going to privatize SAA, we're not privatizing anything. And I think the President has made it clear. At the same time, my political party is also very clear that we will entertain strategic equity partners. And that kind of clarity goes back to the Ready to Govern document that was published many, many years ago by my political organization. On the Presidential Review Committee, I don't have an immediate answer. Many of those recommendations were in fact implemented, but I'll have to look at that, Honorable Ngwenya, and then come back to you on that particular matter. Who appointed consultants? Well, in my earlier remarks, I actually said clearly that the business rescue practitioners had retained the aviation consultants, reducing senior members and so on. This is something that we've been discussing and appealing to the business rescue practitioners to do so that we save money, but they've hardly moved their fingers in that particular regard. Some are not being paid. Well, everybody who's on the SAA side is being paid. Although if you look at the period March until now, end of March until now, you'll find that many airlines, as I pointed out earlier on, are using various techniques from keeping some staff on to furloughing staff, which means you pay a significant part of the salary, you keep them on your list of employees, but they don't get 100% of your salary, to actually asking people to use up leave that they haven't used up before. And in some instances, like Qantas, from what I read, they've actually told 20,000 people go home. And I don't know what kind of support the Australian government is currently giving the Qantas space. There is a case to be made for South African Express. We assisted them to actually make applications to the UIF and the appropriate fund there. So there was some money that came through, but I admit that not enough. and we're still negotiating with the UIF to get as many benefits as possible. And depending on what kind of configuration emerges out of all the discussions that are going to take place in respect of the future of an airline, we can see what we're going to do in relation to SA Express workers as well. But SA Express, as you know, has been going through a tough time. It's well recorded that there was wholesale corruption there as well. Engines stolen, spare parts stolen, a house in Kempton Parkway it was taken, and all sorts of things have happened there. But those matters are with the law enforcement agencies and the commission run by Justice Zondo, so we'll have to look at what happens in that particular regard. But I will certainly agree with you that it's time that there were some severe consequences for people involved in corruption in any one of these entities who need to find themselves behind jail for corruption at a municipal level, corruption in relation to, as I said, certain unnamed banks, and corruption in relation to state-owned entities as well. And I'm sure all South Africans look forward to that day and will welcome those measures. Honorable Danya is very frank about his Eastern Cape link, so the CEO of Transnet will address the question of roads and the manganese trucks. On the question of Denel, which we haven't prepared for, and Rheinmetall, I'll have to find out, Chairperson, what's going on in relation to Denel. But Denel's financial standing is, let's call it stable, but not one that is ideal. They also need to get to a point where they start producing more of the commodities that they can actually sell, depending on the market that they're going to and whether they have permission to sell, so that they can begin to generate income. But we'll be interacting with them, I think, in the next day or so to find out what the latest information is. Unfortunately, there was a breakup in the communication, so I didn't get Mr. Nanya's first question. It was something about SAA and the legislation under which it was actually established. But if he doesn't mind, we can take that on a little later. The Honorable Kachalia says, why no management report? Well, I reported to you that there's no management report. And the reason is that the business rescue practitioners who are now the accounting authority, when they take over, haven't put enough effort into making sure that these reports are available. And as you know, they were present in the standing committee when that request was actually made, and we had concurred with that. And we've made further inquiries, and they've given us a date somewhere in the future where those reports will be ready. Then you asked the question, what are the plans for the future? Well, as I gave you an indication of where the legal and other processes are, and those processes need to be concluded before we can come and tell you authoritatively where we stand. You ask what the trade unions have as skin on the table. I thought I indicated in my opening remarks as well that through the process of consultations with them in the last day or so, there was a willingness by most, if not all, of the trade unions to take salary cuts as a contribution to ensuring that SAA has some money to carry on with some of its work, and there are other attempts to find money as well. Any change in foreign ownership? No, none intended at the moment. The Transnet questions that you ask, Honorable Kacharia, will be addressed by the Transnet people. I don't think that demurrage and issues like that emerge at this point in time, particularly when you have a state of disaster. But let them address that and the maintenance question, although they partly addressed that in the presentation that they actually made originally. The Eskom CEO will address the question of labor and the question of diesel and provisions for diesel. Honorable Khomane, I've addressed the documentation question. And again, the issue of business model and how it will be financed is, as I said, a part of the discussion. You wanted to know who has been responsible for corruption. I think there have been many reports in this particular regard, and I can't name names publicly, But where those reports have been made to the law enforcement authorities and to others, and there have been some stated in the Zondo Commission as well, those are the people that clearly need to be dealt with in whatever way possible. As far as employees of SA Express is concerned, I'm extremely sympathetic to their position, and will continue to try to engage with the UIF to see what assistance they can get in addition to what they've had up to this particular point in time. And will there be load shedding in the future? Let the Eskom CEO address that question, Chairperson. I'll make some rounding up remarks once the CEOs have addressed their respective questions. So with your consent, can we ask Mr. Director to take the Eskom questions and Ms. Davi to take the Transnet questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Chairpersons, honourable members, if I can respond to the questions. Thank you for those questions. The questions posed by the Honourable Kluter, as well as Honourable Malinga and the Honourable Kumane, all relate to Eskom to avoid load shedding to the extent possible once we return out of lockdown to a normal pattern of consumption. As I've tried to indicate, we have now, through our short-term maintenance efforts, created additional buffer capacity of some 2,000 megawatts. We've also, through demand management interventions, as well as the procurement of additional capacity, added another 900 megawatts of available capacity. So we've added more than 10% of the average daily consumption in terms of our ability to buffer. So we believe that with these interventions, the likelihood of load shedding, as we've indicated, for the coming winter has been significantly reduced from our previous forecast, thanks to these interventions. Quite what will happen in terms of the development of demand depends very much on the way in which the lockdown is lifted, whether there is a big bang approach to allow industries to return to work, or whether there is, as has been the case up to now, a more gradual phased-in approach from a demand management perspective and also from our ability to ramp up our production, a gradual return, as we have seen, moving from level 5 to level 4 would certainly be preferable, and we've demonstrated our ability to cope with the increased demand as a consequence of that. If I can address the Honourable Kachalia's question on maintenance, we have indeed performed maintenance extensively. The short-term maintenance, as I tried to explain in my presentation, we've been unable to perform the longer-term maintenance because of the medical undesirability of congregating large numbers of contractors and employees on our sites. That would be inadvisable from a contamination perspective, so we wouldn't want to indulge in that. But we will be able to resume that as soon as the lockdown is lifted, and then there will be a period of about 12 to 18 months during which we will be conducting this maintenance. May I also use this opportunity to thank the public, first of all, but also appeal to the public to continue to use electricity wisely during this period. The support that Eskom is receiving from organised labour, it has been one of my key focus areas to engage with organised labour to ensure that they are informed and engage with them on a regular basis. And I think that we enjoy, at this point in time, a very open, very robust and very honest relationship with our colleagues. In organised labour, if there are issues, they raise them and we resolve them in a very collaborative and positive way. And I'm very grateful for the cooperation that we receive from organised labour in this regard. The annual diesel consumption is budgeted for. It's part of our budget that we put together, which is approved, first of all, by our board, but then also by the shareholder. For the past financial year, I might just add that we undershot that budget by consuming some 2.4 billion rand less in diesel than we had budgeted for. So we are tightening our belts also on the diesel consumption. And of course, the more that our system becomes reliable, the lower the diesel consumption will be. And that is something that we are aiming for. Thank you, Honourable Chair. If I may hand back to you to preside over the remainder of the questions.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. I don't know whether you are done.
No, the Transnet.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair.
Asking. Okay. Thank you.
To deal with the remaining questions.
Yes.
The first one, which was asked, was about the Ghana rail deal. So nothing of that sort, Chair. What I can say that on the 5th of December last year, during the South Africa-Ghana binational, we signed a 5-year agreement for the revitalization of the Western Line. It was signed between the Ghana Rail Corporation as well as the Ghana Rail Development Agency and Transnet. Sorry. Chair, should I continue?
Yes, you can continue. I think the other member has not moved. Yeah.
Oh, so this is there's no intention to get any other player, and it's a 5-year deal where we will be helping to maintain to revitalize the operations of the line. There's no intention to have any other private partner on this concession whatsoever. On the question of Cradock and the manganese, it would be an issue that we're really concerned about. For us, as much capacity as is possible needs to move from road to rail. So I've been trying to sort of establish exactly for what reason these trucks are on road. But the long and the short of it, if I can give some assurances, our branch line strategy has actually quite a few lines that are in the Eastern Cape that we are prioritizing. I think the members would be aware of the Umtata Amabele line, which actually recently we had the Pillow Pepper train operating on. The concession for Ellisdale and Grahamstown is being concluded and negotiated. Stadstrom to Maclear, it's a bit of a difficult line and requires quite a significant amount of investment to be able to actualize. And then Cookhouse Blaney as well. Chair, I mentioned these as our serious stance to ensure that not only does traffic move off road to rail, but also that we provide opportunities for small players to come into the industry and support us in running the branch line networks. What is Transnet doing in this time of COVID? Members would be aware of the fact that we have the Pillow Pepper trains, and the trains have now been, in fact, we finalized agreement with Department of Health, where one is going to be in the Eastern Cape and the one in KZN, and they're helping in both instances to help with COVID testing whilst they run their usual clinics in the other areas. We've also actively participated in supporting by providing to government any of our facilities that would have been for quarantining during this time. We've also been approached by a few smaller businesses who may be renting some of our facilities for payment holidays, And in line with the rest of the industry, we are reviewing these and looking at providing appropriate support because this is a tough time for all of us. The question that was also asked about port congestion in Durban, really the one time when there was a bit of a tight situation was when we had the question of what do you do with non-essential cargo. Government was very helpful, and the eThekwini municipality, as well as SARS, they quickly came on board. We no longer have that problem. All of the cargo is now out of the port and in the warehouses. As I indicated, the real issue now is to make sure that as the whole of the economy comes out, we quickly move that volume, which is in warehouses, into operating facilities as well, so that we don't have a backlog. As the Minister indicated, because COVID affected all of us, we all called force majeure, including the cargo owners. So none of us will be liable at this particular juncture. But, Honourable Member, you can be assured that we are doing everything to make sure that we reduce the waiting time of ships at the port. And at some point, we'd be more than happy to indicate the improvements in performance as far as that's concerned. On maintenance, we tried to do as much as we could, but unfortunately, because the lockdown not only had affected every single operator, and unfortunately, some of our partners will help us with maintenance, we were just able to do enough with some of the staff, because remember, we also had only 50% of our staff deployed into operations. The last question was the impact of commodity prices. Well, on the one hand, we have take-or-pay contracts for some of our commodities. So in the immediate, we can't see too many problems, but there's no running away from the fact that we worry quite significantly if there's a sudden fall-off in total demand, given if the lockdowns around the world extend longer than is currently the period. But also, as I indicated, we are working very hard to make sure that we plan for any scenario and are ensuring that we are compressing as much of our costs as possible, whilst ensuring that the maintenance costs that we have to have, which is tied to us improving our service, does indeed go ahead. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Chair.
Chair, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Chair?
Chairperson.
Yes, I can hear you. I think before you can speak, Honourable Member, I wanted to check with the Minister whether he's done.
Whether, sorry?
Whether you're done, Minister.
Yeah, no, I'm done, Chair. And we must then arrange the next meeting, and then we can continue with this discussion. We were just told update on SOEs was the topic, so we fitted in 3 today. Imagine if we try to fit in all 7.
Person, can we have another bite, please?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
No,
Totally agree.
other
We need
people
another fight.
right.
Honourable members, can we speak one at a time?
Member Arnold,
we're fine. Can you listen, honourable members? I'm handing over to Honourable Magata, my co-chair, to continue with the meeting. Honourable co-chair. Honourable Magata.
Chairperson of the NCOP, you acknowledge me to speak.
We hear you, Honourable Arnolds and the Honourable Member. I'm handing over to Honourable Magata to continue with the meeting. We are co-chairing.
Okay, we understand, but can he also acknowledge and
thank you, Honourable Chair.
Chairperson, please, before you continue, I said my questions are not answered. And now I see the Minister has left the meeting.
Chair,
and the Minister has not...
That's not correct. Other people are talking twice who haven't spoken.
Yes.
Honourable members, Honorable members.
We're listening.
Yeah, I think we
We're
are
listening.
also, I think we are also experiencing some technical problems.
No, I've been muted.
Oh, there's no technical problem.
You are being muted here.
No, please, may we respect the chair?
Yeah, we're being muted.
Yeah, we are gonna mute you if you are not.
No, it's wrong. It's extremely wrong.
I'm not the host of this meeting, therefore I cannot mute anyone. Unfortunately. Otherwise, if I had those powers, I wouldn't allow people to howl. I will mute them. But unfortunately, technology doesn't allow me because I'm not the host of this session. I'm just a chair and co-chairing. Both myself and the Honorable Chairperson of the Select Committee, we don't have powers to mute. But all what we can do is to appeal to honorable members to behave in the manner in which we're supposed to behave in a parliamentary session. And I would ask honorable members when they are not speaking, when it's not their time to speak, to mute so that we don't hear anything from their side. I think everybody hear me. Honorable members,
this is wrong. Can we raise our
make
issue?
few clarities. Somebody speaking and I've not given anyone time to speak.
Can I be
supposed to be
recognized?
listening and mute. That's how we work on this visual meeting.
No, but you can't be muted by staff.
Otherwise, that will be a misconduct if somebody is speaking while is not given a right to speak.
Why are you muting us when
Again, honorable members, I just want to clarify one thing in relation to the documentation.
Chairperson, is the minister still there?
Yes,
They're
I
not
am
recognizing anyone, just listening.
Colleagues, can you please stop this now? You are wasting time.
Honorable member, honorable member, there is no member who's supposed to speak while the chair is in the platform.
But
you're
you are very
supposed
slow.
to
You are
just mute.
extremely slow. You are extremely slow, Chairperson. We need to continue with the meeting.
No. This is not your meeting. This is our meeting as a portfolio committee and the select committee. You are just part of that meeting. Behave, Com. Honorable members, in relation to the document, I think we need to appreciate that we were not part of the 16 portfolio and select committees that were given a right to continue their business. We had to ask a special request to the parliamentary leadership that we given an opportunity to have this session. And unfortunately, in the process of doing that, we had to have this meeting also with the presence of the minister. Therefore, to have that arrangement, the parliamentary authority could not give us an official position to have this meeting without making it a point that the minister is available. Therefore, it took strictly 3 days for us to get the minister available. That's why even the time is not a normal time, it's the time in the evening. It's because this was the only time where the minister was available. Therefore, I think the preparation for this meeting were a bit compromised because of the agency and the time limit that we had. Therefore, I do sympathize with the minister when people started to lambast him while understanding the circumstances in which we convened this session. Secondly,
on a point of order,
we are an oversight committee. We are not a parliament. We do have enough time to wrestle and fight in the National Assembly or in the NCOP. Here, in this session, we are supposed not to have those political wrestling, but to behave as committee members whose role is to play an oversight. We're not supposed to play party politics in the portfolio committee and select committee.
Chairperson,
We understand that people are coming from political parties, but when we come to the committee, because if we start playing that political wrestling, it could be chaotic, because anyway, energies and strength are not. No, I'm not giving you any point. I will give you a
point of order, Chairperson. You are out of order.
I'm saying
out
to
of
make
order.
this clarification.
Keep quiet. No,
What
the
point of
chairperson
order?
is on the line. Quiet. Seriously. Unmute yourself. It's like serious.
What point of order, honorable member?
No, don't take it. Conclude what you are saying.
We are
out of order.
What point of order, honorable member? I gave you the point of order. What's the point of order you raising?
Chairperson, I rose on a point of order.
You call me and I'm saying I'm giving you a point of order.
I'm on the floor, Chairperson.
Yeah, but this some of the ANC must not speak. Why is he speaking? Why is he speaking?
Chairperson,
who are you to tell us
the point of order? Because I can hear that you are
what
giving
is your
a
point of order? Your point of order is point of order.
Don't interrupt me. You are giving us a very long
No,
preamble.
you are
The minister is here to respond to us on issues that concern our constituency.
That's not a point of order. That's not a point of order.
Why are you protecting the Minister of Public Enterprise? You need to give us some answer. Why are you doing this?
Remember, you are disrupting the meeting.
Disrupting the meeting. Chairperson is in order. Chairperson is on the podium. Respect that. But who are you Can the meeting go? To speak.
You don't try to be honorable.
Whoever calls the meeting must then close the meeting.
Honorable member.
You must be
member. Don't try things you don't do. You don't do that. You don't behave. Honorable member. Don't behave in the manner. Yeah. Don't try to behave in a manner which you never behave in the committee, taking an advantage of this visual meeting. You know for a fact that you never behave such in a meeting. Don't take chances because we happen to be on a visual session and we are broadcasted. Please, behave yourself. Don't be opportunistic, man. You never behave as such where we had a meeting before. I never see that kind of unusual behavior from yourself. You are supposed, you know how to behave yourself in a session. Don't take this opportunity because now we are not in front of you. You are sitting in your place and you are talking through the visual. I want to appeal to you that this meeting was called specifically, get the report that we have, not to exercise our political differences yet. You know, otherwise you won't give us, and we won't be able to organize this meeting if we are organizing a meeting for you to misbehave. We organize this meeting for members who are supposed to play oversight role, to be able to have a knowledge as to what is taking place currently in the state-owned enterprises.
Can you switch on your camera, Chair?
Keep your own political issues with you. If you have to raise, wait for the parliament and you play your childish behavior there.
Point of order.
I won't give you any point of order. I won't give you because you don't have a point of order.
Out of order.
You are out of order. I will close this meeting. I will close this meeting.
This is not your branch meeting of the ANC.
This is not your house.
Yeah. It's a portfolio committee not a committee of EFF.
Can we continue with the meeting? We want to ask the minister questions, please.
How is the meeting of the EFF?
No, you have to follow. You have to follow the guidance of a chairperson in a meeting.
Yeah, but don't run the meeting as if it's a branch meeting of the ANC.
As you normally do in the portfolio committee meeting.
It's not a branch meeting.
There's nothing that is going to change now, precisely because we are in a visual meeting.
Switch on your camera. Switch on your camera, Chief. We want to see you.
Secondly, this meeting is not about attacking each other, because, by the way, you know for a fact that you don't have that power to overpower us by making that noise. Don't take advantage of visual meeting, please, me.
You are being disrespectful. You are not
You are out of order.
You want to raise points.
You are taking chances because we are in a visual meeting. You pretend as if you can behave that way in a meeting. You are left there in a meeting situation. Now, please, let's not exploit this situation. Let's use this as a process of engaging each other. Unfortunately, now, because of time, we have to close this session. Thank you very much.
You are a bully. You are a bully. And you are not going to bully us. We are not going to be bullied by you. This is not a branch meeting of the ANC. You are out of order, comrade. Public enterprise. We need to ask questions and be answered here. We are not going to be bullied by you, person.
No. And assembly is always.
We can have this meeting alone with the minister if you want to. But if all of the meeting, we're going to hold the minister accountable. Never. It's not going to happen.
You do not even have
the minister
right
still there. Can I ask him a question about
this is
the
a
pledge
select
of
committee
government
and a
now
portfolio
rescuing
committee.
SAA?
You don't even have the right to do it. You can't overpower
They must lead the workers.
on this type of a
And they
meeting.
say they will rescue
This
SAA.
is so wrong.
No, you're out of order. The rules of the NNSOP appeals right now. Can you ask the chairperson that to take over?
You're not the deputy chairperson here.
Can you
You're equal like us. You're not supposed to give us rules right now.
Mara, who is speaking here? This person needs to stop speaking.
Who's the deputy?
Let us not do that. We've moved the motion that we must propose that this meeting, based on the fact that we don't have documentation, can we go and appraise ourselves so that we're not sound bites, comrades? We don't want to be sound bites, all of us, including EFF, even GA. We want to ask constructive questions. We want the minister to account, comrades. We don't agree with these things of new airlines and privatizations, all of us. But we're asking that this meeting came, we got a briefing. Can we then, comrades, allow a position where we are saying that next week we'll interrogate deliberations?
On a point of order, this is a properly organized meeting of parliament. We can't be told that this was a briefing. It's a properly organized meeting of parliament as organized by parliament.
Do you have a document?
No, listen. Whether you've got a document, if we don't have questions to ask, don't tag us. We don't have problems here. Don't tag us into your problems. See, now we are prepared for this meeting. We're prepared, well prepared. The minister is here. We're well prepared to ask questions. So don't tag us into your problems. Go and deal with your minister there because he's your executive.
Close this meeting for the next meeting. We want to propose
we can't close this meeting. Where is the chairperson of the select committee in the NCOP? Because the chairperson of your portfolio committee left the meeting. Where's the chairperson of the select committee? We can't be closing meetings like that. It can't happen.
Our questions remain unanswered. I want my answer. I raised questions and only one of my questions was answered. Now I'm told that now this meeting is chairperson-led. There's no chairperson in this meeting.
This is not progressive. Let's agree, comrades. Let's do justice to ourselves.
Yeah, but
we're in the same page.
It must be recorded.
Yeah, we don't know. I don't know.
The chairperson of the ANC collapsed the meeting of the portfolio committee, joint portfolio committee, and select committee.
That is what they do. They project corruption. He collapsed the meeting for protecting Jamnanda. We want to continue.
You must stop
My questions must be answered. I want answers.
If you have an argument, put your argument. If you have a question, put your question.
Yes, we've got questions. We've got questions.
No,
the minister is still here.
Questions, they are not answered.
Oh, they are answered. You know what the answers are.
Minister, can I ask you a question?
What is the answer? We wrote to you letters. We're not Minister Pravin. You have not responded to our letters. Again, I reiterated today. You're telling me that
our minister we're asking, comrades, can we postpone this meeting for next week? Seriously, for productivity.
We can.
For people
we
of
still have follow-up questions.
No, we can't. The meeting is adjourned. For this meeting. Why is it?
We've been at this meeting from 6 o'clock, from 5:30 for that matter. And we're not getting progress.
This is our only time where we... This is our only time where we have Minister Gordhan to answer questions in both houses. So we can't do it.
Come next week.
No.
Can I appeal to Parliament process that they must stop this meeting? This meeting is not progress, comrades. We're not getting the response.
Where are the contents of this meeting? Where are the chairpersons of the meeting? The meeting needs to continue.
We are appealing as political parties who are proving a motion that says, comrades, can we consider next week so that we are able to deliberate with these deliberations that have been
No.
So you want to be soundbite. Once you are soundbite things, soundbite things.
No, we don't have a problem. Even if the meeting is not live, but we need to do our constituency work as members of parliament.
Parliament staff must stop muting me. They didn't invite me to parliament. I was not invited by a staff member to parliament. I must not be muted by staff that gets employed. I was not employed. I'm deployed by the EFF.
They muted me. They muted me in the first place, and I asked them not to do it.
Staff. That's the arrogance of the ANC. To get muted by staff. This one, the chairperson ran away. Useless chairpersons, they ran away from the meeting. They organized
the chairperson and the co-chairperson.
We want to ask questions and get responses. One answer.
We can't continue. Oh, no, hold on. We can't continue this way.
No. Where is the chairperson and the co-chairperson? Both houses. Where are these people?
Call the chairperson. Call the chairperson, your colleagues, the ANC chairperson. Call him back.
You let all of us, comrades, and chairperson take over the meeting. No.
When Minister Gordhan appears before a portfolio committee or before any other house, this is what happens. Either a chairperson of the house disrupt the whole thing, or either a chairperson of the portfolio committee. We're not interested in your comrades. We're not interested in your politics. We just want to be answered here. No.
No, you're pulling us. You are bullies.
No,
we're not bullying you in any way. We want to be answered by executive.
This is not a branch meeting.
This is not a branch meeting here.
Call your chairperson. Don't bring amateurs here who are going to run away from meetings when it gets hot. Bring back your chairperson. He must come and take this meeting.
Both chairpersons back. They must come back here. They need to come back here. we can't be bullied by ANC chairpersons. If there's any portfolio committee or select committee, chairpersons needs to know that members of parliament are eligible to ask questions to members of the executive. And this is the time that we have said, as members of parliament, executive needs to come and account to us. There's no point where we are going to be told that executive members are busy. They're busy with what? What? In a COVID-19, all of them in their own homes, in their own comfort. We can do this meeting even up until 12 o'clock midnight. Why not to do it?
No, Makausi, I agree with you.
Questions from our own constituencies.
No, but Makausi, if we don't have conduct and there's no chairperson of the meeting, there's no order, comrades. There's no
because we recorded. Judith, let's agree that it must be recorded that the chairperson of this meeting, they left the meeting. They left the meeting because they want to protect corruption. We want to ask about the corruption of Eskom. We want to ask about the corruption of Transnet. We want to ask about the corruption of SAA. And the chairpersons of these two committees, they ran away from it because they are protecting corruption.
No, who's that?
So they are not fit to be chairpersons. They must be removed. They are not fit. How can they run away from a meeting they've organized? This is not a joke. We're talking about the lives of our brothers and sisters here. We're being told that people are going to be retrenched. Yes. Because of the corruption our brothers and sisters are going to be retrenched.
Bring them back. Bring those people back. Bring them back here.
Can we agree that we will unmute ourselves, comrades?
The meeting is not closed. Who closed this meeting?
That the chairpersons of this meeting, they left the meeting. Because they want to deliberately to collapse this meeting in protection of corruption.
No, you're making noise in China. You're making noise. Comrades, you're making noise. Can you unmute yourself and find out what happened to this meeting? Because I also don't have an idea. Please, comrades. Let's unmute ourselves.
Call him back. Call him. You've got his phone number.
Who closed this meeting? Who closed this meeting? Who closed the meeting?
We're not going to be disrespected by ANC like that. Those chairpersons must
come
back.
This is a formal meeting recorded by Parliament. Who closed this meeting?
You closed this meeting, Makausi, yourself. Uncontrollable.
The meeting was never closed. This meeting was never closed.
Being recognized. When you speak without being recognized, you make noise.
Like you, that you're speaking without being recognized. You've been speaking without being recognized yourself. And they are not
the meeting was never closed.
Our eyes. Because you treat us as another political party, but we've got the audacity to come and tell us that you must not bring our political parties here.
Bring back those members. We want them here.
We don't want weak chairpersons here. If they're weak, they must stay at home.
Those people, we need to pass a motion in the next follow-up meeting that, in fact, those people must be removed as chairpersons. New people, interim chairpersons, must chair those meetings so that there's animosity and there's peace.
Can I ask who's Andrew? Oh, Makausi, who's Andrew? Andrew is quiet. Who's this Andrew? Andrew, go and get it. Why are you quiet, this Andrew? Who's Andrew and where's it coming from?
Who appointed the chairperson? Who appointed the chairperson? It's not of a business. He just wants to speak. Who appointed you to the chairperson?
Andrew speaking. Andrew, unmute yourself. Andrew, unmute yourself. He's speaking and we can hear him. Do you hear him?
Are you the chairperson now?
Yeah, Musa. No, I'm just asking. Do you hear Andrew?
Mara, honestly, there are 45 people still online and watching us. Where is the chairperson and the co-chairperson of the NCOP of this meeting? We can't be left in disarray. This was a properly and constituted meeting of Parliament, and this is parliament resources. If this is how the ANC treat us, number one, if this is how the ANC going to move forward, number two, we need to be told